From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA!
Lower down.
Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA!
In a historic day of action, more than 1 million students from over 3,000 schools walk out of classes to protest gun violence. Many students walked out for 17 minutes. 1 minute for each person murdered in Parkland, Florida. Plus, we'll remember the life of 17-year-old Cortland Arrington, who was shot dead last week inside her high school in Birmingham, Alabama. Her death has received little national attention. Then the coalition of Immokalee workers intensified their campaign against Wendy's by holding a 5-day hunger strike.
Wendy's refusal thus far to join the Fair Food program gives us the strength to be here as women, as mothers with families, as young people, the entire community of Immokalee who is here to fight for respect in the fields where Wendy's buys its tomatoes, and to show through our fast that we have a powerful commitment to this struggle.
We speak also with Rebecca Solnit about mansplaining, movements, and Me Too.
It is systemic, which means that what we need to talk about isn't just going after specific high-profile perpetrators, but how do we change the system? How do we undermine the patriarchy, the misogyny, the lack of empathy, the culture that makes men feel powerful and awesome when they do this stuff?
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a historic day of action, more than 1 million students from over 3,000 schools walked out of classes across the country and around the world to protest gun violence Wednesday. Walkouts occurred in all 50 states, as well as some overseas. In Littleton, Colorado, hundreds walked out of Columbine High School, site of the 1999 massacre that left 15 people dead. In Madison, Wisconsin, thousands of students walked out and marched on the state capitol building, where they flooded the rotunda and chanted, "We want Walker," outside the office of Republican Governor Scott Walker, who's resisted calls for gun control. In Washington, D.C., protesters placed 14,000 shoes on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol, one for each of the estimated 7,000 children who've died of gunshot wounds since the Sandy Hook school massacre of 2012. Across the mall, hundreds of D.C. area students protested outside the White House, turning their backs on the building and sitting silently for 17 minutes, 1 minute for each person killed at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida a month ago. This is 16-year-old Reem Araje and 17-year-old Simone Hicks speaking at the protest.
I hope that the president will step up, stop accepting money from the NRA, because if all the deaths that have occurred aren't enough to convince him, then I guess it just has to be us protesting right now.
If you can protect guns this much and don't have the same regard for the people who are going to create your country in the future, then we're in trouble. The kids are the future. If you're not protecting the kids, then what's left?
The protest came as the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a bill authorizing $50 million in grants to schools for safety protocols and training. The bill does not contain any gun control measures, and Republican congressional leaders have signaled they don't intend to bring any new gun bills to the floor. Meanwhile, in Florida's Broward County, a judge entered a not guilty plea Wednesday for 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, who's charged with murdering 17 people last month at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. The judge entered the plea as Cruz bowed his head and remained silent throughout his arraignment. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty in his case. In Northern California, 3 students were injured Tuesday when a teacher trained in the use of firearms accidentally fired a bullet from his gun in a classroom at Seaside High School near Monterey. Dennis Alexander, who also serves as a city council member and a reserve police officer, was teaching a lesson on gun safety when his pistol discharged. The bullet struck the classroom ceiling, ejecting shrapnel that lodged in a 17-year-old's neck. 2 other students were injured by falling debris. The incident came as President Trump and the NRA are pushing to arm teachers and school staff nationwide in the wake of the Parkland High School massacre. Back on Capitol Hill, senators voted 67 to 31 in favor of a sweeping bipartisan bill rolling back many of the reforms of the Dodd-Frank Act, passed in 2010 in the wake of the financial collapse and Great Recession. The bill would exempt 25 of the nation's 40 largest banks from being subject to heightened scrutiny by the Federal Reserve. The bill would also end the so-called Volcker Rule, which prohibits some banks from making risky bets with taxpayer-insured money. The bill would also loosen a requirement on some mortgage lenders that tracks whether they're discriminating against minorities. 13 Democrats voted in favor of the bill, sending it to the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. Among the bill's opponents, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who proposed an alternative measure on Wednesday.
Today, I introduced the Ending Too Big to Jail Act, which would help make sure that big bank executives are hauled out of their corner offices in handcuffs the next time they break the law. That would do more for America's working families than anything in this bill, and I'm going to fight to help make it law.
President Trump has named Larry Kudlow to replace Gary Cohn as head of the National Economic Council a week after Cohn resigned in protest of Trump's tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. Larry Kudlow is a syndicated columnist and radio host and once served as chief economist at the investment firm Bear Stearns before he was fired in 1995 when he entered rehab to treat a $100,000 a month cocaine habit. Kudlow has repeatedly failed to forecast macroeconomic trends. In December of 2007, as the subprime mortgage market began to unravel, leading to the deepest recession since the 30s, Kudlow wrote, quote, "There's no recession coming. The pessimists are wrong. It's not going to happen. The Bush boom is alive and well. It's finishing up its 6th consecutive year with more to come." In Syria, human rights groups say as many as 50 civilians were killed Wednesday as a relentless assault by Russian and Syrian forces continued to pound the rebel-held Damascus suburb of eastern Ghouta. One local medic warned 5,000 people are at risk of annihilation. At the United Nations, Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights Kate Gilmore warned 125,000 children remained entrapped in eastern Ghouta.
Those responsible for these war crimes and crimes against humanity are being identified. The chain of evidence is being preserved. Dossiers are being built up for their prosecution, and duly convened tribunals will hold them legally accountable for these crimes that in malice they continued to wage with scant regard for Syria's children. But by allowing their cruelty to continue to violate the rights of Syria's children, the international community too must confront the blood on its hands.
Meanwhile, Turkey's military has encircled the northern Syrian city of Afrin, where the United Nations is warning of a growing humanitarian disaster. Residents of Afrin have had no access to clean drinking water for a week after Turkish troops and their allies cut water supplies to the area. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has vowed to crush the Kurdish YPG militia known as the People's Protection Units who control Afrin. Turkey's offensive has sparked protests by Kurds around the world. On Tuesday, police in Paris used tear gas to drive back hundreds of Kurdish protesters and their allies as they demonstrated outside the U.S. Embassy, where they accused the Trump administration of failing to prevent Turkish atrocities in Syria. In Pakistan, a bomb detonated a local police checkpoint in Lahore Wednesday, killed 9 people and wounded at least 27 others. The Pakistani Taliban took credit for the blast, which came during a police shift change outside a religious festival attended by nearly 80,000 people. At the United Nations, Britain and its allies condemned Russia Wednesday over its alleged poisoning of Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury in Britain last week. Britain's ambassador to the United Nations, Julian Braithwaite, told the UN's Human Rights Council a Russian military-grade nerve agent was to blame and that the Russian state was almost certainly behind the attack. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley blasted Russia, telling the Security Council that one member may have used chemical weapons on the sovereign soil of another member. Her comments came as President Trump has been reluctant to blame Russia for the alleged poisoning. Russia has denied it was behind the attack, calling the charges a fairy tale. In Mexico, the Attorney General says police have arrested the fourth of 7 suspects in the disappearance of 43 students at the Ayotzinapa Teacher Training College in 2014. Authorities say 35-year-old Eric Uriel Sandoval Rodriguez was a hitman for a criminal cartel involved in the disappearances. The students went missing September 26, 2014, after being attacked by local police. International experts say the Mexican military and federal police also played a role in the students' disappearance. In Brazil, prominent human rights activist and city council member Marielle Franco and her driver were shot dead as they drove through downtown Rio de Janeiro Wednesday. Police say 2 unknown assailants remain at large in the double murder, which also left Franco's press officer injured. Franco was a black LGBT woman from one of Rio's poorest neighborhoods. In 2016, she was elected to the Rio City Council under the Socialism and Liberty Party. Franco was a longtime critic of Brazil's police, who've been linked to hundreds of killings and thousands of incidents of brutality in Rio's impoverished favela neighborhoods. In China, government censors have ordered the internet scrubbed of all references to an incident that unfolded on live national television Tuesday at the National People's Congress. During the meeting, Communist Party officials took pre-approved softball questions from reporters. As one journalist asked a long-winded question about state asset supervision, a neighboring journalist rolled her eyes before turning away in disgust. The video was seen by millions and quickly went viral on Chinese social media, spawning memes and animated GIFs before government censors ordered all references to the incident removed from online search results. Back in the United States, Oklahoma's Attorney General said Wednesday the state will seek to put prisoners to death using asphyxiation by nitrogen gas. The proposal comes as Oklahoma has struggled to procure lethal injection drugs following a string of botched executions. In a statement, Dale Bache, an attorney for Oklahoma's death row prisoners, said, quote, "This method has never been used before and is experimental. How can we trust Oklahoma to get this right when the state's recent history reveals a culture of carelessness and mistakes in executions?" the lawyer asked. In Albany, New York, a former senior aide to Governor Andrew Cuomo has been found guilty on 3 counts of corruption. Joseph Percoco was convicted of soliciting and accepting over $300,000 in bribes on behalf of executives from a pair of companies with state business. Governor Cuomo has said he wasn't in charge of the contracts involved and that he had no idea about the alleged bribery and contract rigging laid out by the prosecutors. And in Pennsylvania, Democrat Connor Lamb has won an upset victory in Tuesday's special election for the state's 18th congressional district. Lamb is a former prosecutor and Marine Corps captain who narrowly won a district Trump carried by 20 points during the 2016 election. This is the Democratic candidate Connor Lamb speaking Wednesday evening.
We followed what I learned in the Marines. Leave no one behind. We went everywhere. We talked to everyone. We invited everyone in. And we found that there is public support for programs like Social Security and Medicare that's nearly universal because these programs are universal. They are America's way of saying, we are all in this together.
Republican groups poured nearly $11 million into the race to try to avoid losing a district that Trump won easily in 2016. The race was widely seen as a bellwether on the 2018 midterm elections. Because of redistricting, the district will not exist after next election. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. In a historic day of action, more than 1 million students from over 3,000 schools walked out of classes to protest gun violence on Wednesday. Walkouts occurred in all 50 states, as well as some schools overseas. This was the scene outside one school here in New York City.
No guns, no violence, 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 no guns.
My name is Chelsea. I go to the High School of Fashion Industries, and today we're here to protest against what happened at Parkland. We're here to stop gun violence in schools and everywhere.
I'm a student, not a target. I'm a student, not a target.
to High School of Fashion Industries, and we're here protesting gun violence all across America. Guns don't solve problems, they create problems. And obviously, as you can see, we all feel strongly about this. This is something that's been going on for far too long. And if adults aren't going to take action, we need to take action.
I go to the High School Fashion Industry. We are protesting to disarm the NRA and the mass school shootings that has happened across the country. And it has to end now. And it starts with every school protesting. And we are here today to stop this shooting. Today, every school should walk out right now and go and protest. Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA! Disarm the NRA!
The nationwide student walkouts occurred 1 month after 17 students and faculty were shot dead at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. At many schools, students walked out for 17 minutes, 1 minute for each person murdered in Parkland. The students at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School are now organizing a massive March for Our Lives on March 24th in Washington, D.C. Democracy Now! Will be there broadcasting live the entire march. Solidarity marches are planned for across the country. In Brooklyn, New York, a walkout occurred at Edward R. Murrow High School.
We are standing here today, halting our education to show that we will not be living in fear of a school shooter. We will not be next. We will not sit in our classrooms wondering why Congress is not working as hard as we are. We will not overlook the fact that it is the students' responsibility to speak out against the dangers of guns. And I'm not just talking about mass shootings. I'm talking about the militarization of our law enforcement and the normalization of these weapons in our communities. We will not let our future be dictated by the millions of dollars from the National Rifle Association that prevent stronger gun laws.
We begin today's show in Denver, Colorado, where we're joined by two organizers of a student walkout at Koonsmiller Creative Arts Academy in Denver, Colorado. We're joined by Lali Mariz and Luna Baez. Luna is the daughter of the undocumented activist Jeanette Vizgara, who's one of the founders of the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition. Jeanette Vizgara took refuge, sanctuary in Denver, but is now out because there is a private bill that protects her. Luna Baez and Lali Mariz, we welcome you both to Democracy Now! Luna, let's begin with you. Talk about what happened yesterday at your middle school.
What happened yesterday at our middle school was we walked out in support of better gun laws and for the 17 that fell during the Parkland school shooting.
You talk about what kind of response you and Luna received when you started to organize this protest. What did teachers and students at your school say to you?
Some of our teachers were very hesitant about the walkout. A lot of them supported us, but we knew that there were some that weren't going to be able to help us to the maximum we needed. And then the students felt like it was very important, and it was important for them to walk out with us because they knew that it affected them in a very big way.
And what about your school principal and other school administrators?
We didn't hear much about our principal. Our vice principal was out there while we were walking out. So it was good to have that kind of support while we were there.
Luna, can you talk about why you chose to be one of the organizers of this protest, and what grade are you in?
I am in 8th grade, and the reason I chose to be one of the organizers was because, from what I know, me and Lali had a bit more experience than the other children.
In organizing?
Than the other students.
And would you say that experience comes from organizing around your mom, Jeanette Vizgara?
Yes.
And Do you see these issues as linked? Can you talk about your mom just for a few minutes? I visited her in Denver at the Unitarian Church, where she had taken sanctuary before she was able to come out because she's protected by a bill that was passed in Congress.
So I would say it would be linked because my experience with media and all things related to that are from my mom's process.
And Lolly, why did you choose to help organize this student walkout? And what demands are you making of President Trump, of Congress, of the NRA?
I chose to help organize the walkout because I knew that this wouldn't just affect us as a school, it would affect everyone in the United States and out of the United States, because this is something that's bigger, and with a bigger group of students, it can allow us to create a bigger impact. And I would just want the president to pass something that says that we have better laws about guns, not necessarily taking away the guns, but nobody needs that type of weapon in their house, where somebody who doesn't need that has it in their hands, and something like Parkland can happen.
And Lolly, how many students participated from your school in the walkout? Were you surprised by how many did or how many didn't?
Yes, we expected maybe 20, 25, 30. We didn't expect that big of a group, and we thought it would just be 8th graders walking out with us. As Luna and I were walking the halls, we noticed that high schoolers were joining, some of the 6th and 7th graders, so I would say about 70, 80. It wasn't a big group, like a big size, but it was large for us as our first walkout.
And of course, 2,000 Denver area students also walked out all over, many marching to the state capitol. I want to thank Luna Baez and Citlali Maris for joining us from Coons Miller Creative Arts Academy in Denver as we go back to more voices from the nationwide student walkout on Wednesday.
No more silence and gun violence! No more silence and gun violence!
All these people have come together today so that they can express how they feel about gun violence and all these things, and how kids don't feel safe in their schools, which is the one place we should feel safe, because that's where we spend most of our time. I hope that the president will step up, stop accepting money from the NRA, because if all the deaths that have occurred aren't enough to convince him, then I guess it just has to be us protesting right now.
If you can protect guns this much and don't have the same regard for the people who are going to create your country in the future, then we're in trouble. The kids are the future. If you're not protecting the kids, then what's left?
Paul Chiazzolo. I'm 17 years old, and I'm president of the Youth Coalition for Black Lives Matter New York. I'm out here also because I lost my father to gun violence, and I lost many family members and friends to gun violence. Gun violence is not a new issue. It affects our communities every single day, and it affects Black and Latino communities disproportionately. I came here to give honor to those 17 lives that were lost, because those people were heroes. But we don't need any more martyrs. We need justice, and that starts here and now.
This is about people, gay, straight, black, white, religious, non-religious, coming together so their kids don't have to be afraid to go to school.
Hi, my name's Carolina Thomas, and I'm 12 years old. And I'm here today because I'm sick and tired of hearing that someone has died at school innocently. I am sick and tired of hearing that someone has been killed at school while learning how to read or write. Why are we fighting for something that the adults should be fighting for? Why are we here marching and walking out of school when the people of Congress should be protecting us?
It makes sense to me that the only problem is the guns. Get rid of the guns, get rid of the violence. We have the most guns than any country on the face of this world. We're the richest country that's ever existed on the planet, and we can't deal with these issues? It doesn't make any sense.
Donald Trump, Mike Pence, gun control is common sense. Donald Trump, Mike Pence, gun control is common sense.
students, we're here uniting our voices to advocate for more stricter gun laws and for a safer school environment, because that's what we come here. We come here for an education, and we don't come here to be worrying, am I going to go home or not?
In order to get our stronger message across, we needed to hold it here, where everyone gets to hear that we are together, we are one, we are with Florida. At the end of the day, we just want our schools to be safe and never be shot up again. That's what we say, never again.
We grow guns. We place them in the hands of Americans and say, go play. The inevitable senseless violence that follows is succeeded by senseless silence.
Voices from the nationwide student walkout on Wednesday. It's estimated about 1 million people walked out, not only in the United States, but calling for gun control all over the world in solidarity with the students at Parkland. This is Democracy Now! We'll be in Washington, D.C. on March 24th, covering the March for Our Lives, organizing the student survivors of Parkland, organizing around the Valentine's Day massacre, calling for comprehensive gun control. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Alabama to hear about another school shooting just a few weeks after Parkland that hasn't gotten anything like the attention of what happened in Florida. Stay with us.
Your mind, where you can twist and shout, let it all hang out, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. Now you won't fool the children of the revolution. Where you can tear a plane in the falling rain. I drive a Rolls Royce, 'cause it's good for my voice, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. Now you won't fool the children of the revolution. Now,
Children of the Revolution by T-Rex here on Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
Wednesday's nationwide student walkout occurred 1 month after 17 students and staff were shot dead at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Many students left classes for 17 minutes, 1 minute for each person murdered in Parkland. But in Alabama, some students walked out for 18 minutes to remember another student who was recently killed by gun violence at school, Cortland Arrington, a 17-year-old African-American student who was shot dead last week at Huffman High School in Birmingham, Alabama, by a fellow student. She was a high school senior who was planning to attend college next year. She had dreams of becoming a nurse.
While the Parkland shooting has dominated national headlines for a month, far less coverage was paid to the death of Cortland. We go now to Birmingham, where we're joined by Cortland's aunt, Shanice Abercrombie. Shanice, welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us what happened to your daughter, to your niece, on, was it March 7th?
Yes. She was in class. School was dismissing, and the young man that was in class with her, he pulled out a gun, and she and some other students asked what was he doing, and he pulled the gun and he shot her. And he shot her in the chest, and the bullet went straight through and it killed her.
And when did you learn what happened to her? How were you told?
School normally lets out about 3:30, and my dad called me. It was a little after 4. I want to say maybe about 15 minutes after 4 o'clock. And my dad called me and told me that her mom had called her. I called him, and her brother called him and told him that she had been shot. And so I left work immediately, and I got to the hospital. And when I got there, I was asking about her. And the young man behind the desk told me to sit down and he would get some information for me. At that time, I saw the police officer, and I saw a well-dressed man. I did not know that he was the chaplain. The police officer came over to me, And he asked me, was I the mother? And I told him that I wasn't. I told him that I was her aunt and that I'm her dad's sister. And I told him that her dad is incarcerated, but my dad and I helped take care of her. And so he said, well, just stay right there. I'll be right back with some information. So shortly after that, the EMT came out and he sat next to me and he had an orange sticker and an ink pen. And he asked me what was her name, and I gave him her name, and he asked me her birth date. At that time, I asked him, could he tell me anything or what was going on with her? And he told me he couldn't tell me anything. I could tell by his response, because he held his head down. He didn't even give me eye contact. I knew it wasn't good. I called my aunt at that time because her number was the only one I could remember. And I asked her to call the family and tell the family what happened and to tell the family to pray, because I know it's not good if Courtland can't identify herself, if she can't speak. And so shortly after that, her mother showed up at the hospital, and I told her mom to go to the desk and let them know that she's here so that they can give her some information, because we didn't know anything. Later, my dad arrived and my husband arrived, and we waited for a while. The young man's family was there as well, and they were very loud and acting very unruly, and they asked our family to move from the door so that people could come in. So we stepped to the side. Shortly after that, her mom went back, and her mom's boyfriend. They came back out. Well, her mom didn't come back out, but her boyfriend did. And he did a motion as to up under the neck type of motion, and as to say, you know, that it was over. And that's when we knew that Courtland, I'm sorry, that's when we knew that Courtland did not make it.
And Shanice, how did her dad find out that Courtland had died, had been killed in school?
I called the prison, and that same night I called the prison, and I explained to them what happened. They told me they took my number and to give a few minutes, and they would go and get him and bring him to the phone. They were very nice, the officers that we spoke to, and they brought my brother to the phone. And my grandmother is 92, so he thought it was my grandmother. And I told him no. I told him that Courtland had been shot at school, and but she didn't make it. She died. So my brother, that's my brother's only child. My brother, he did not take it well at all. My brother said that was all he had been wanting. We've been working with the Maxwell Law Firm to get him out of prison, and that's all he talked about was when he got out, what he was gonna do with her and everything. My brother and I had a conversation just the exact week before to the day, and we were talking about his attorney's payment. And my brother said, Courtland is all set. And anytime anybody would give him try to send him money, he would always divert it to her to help take care of her. And he said, she didn't even know I've ordered her prom dress. He said, and I've ordered a cap and gown. He said, and I'm so proud of her because she's did it. She's made it. And he said, and she's gonna be so excited when that dress comes, because she doesn't know that I've done that. And
she wanted to be a nurse?
Yes, she wanted to be a nurse. My brother, I spoke with her instructor, and her instructor said that she was 2 months out from being a nursing assistant, and she was gonna do that until she finished her RN program. And my brother said that I ordered all of her scrubs, all of her stuff is done for her. So he said, I took care of that for her.
Shanice,
so she didn't have to worry about that.
The Centers for Disease Control looked at gun deaths over a 12-year period since 2002 and found that Black young people, Black children, are 10 times more likely to be killed by a gun than white kids. Yes. What are you calling for right now?
This is an adult problem that has to be solved by the adults. Our future, the children are our future, and they're dying. And we won't have a future if we don't do anything about it. Something has to be done. There needs to be stricter laws as far as security goes in the schools. Something has to be done to intervene in how easy it is for a child to get a gun. Adults have to go through so many checks. How is it that these guns are making it on the streets and they can get them so easily? And then, you know, the law states that if your child is of school age, that they have to go to school. If the parents don't send their children to school, they're put in jail. So why can't they protect our children while they're at school? Your child may not come home. That is very horrifying for a parent to know I've dropped my child off at school, or they rode the bus to school, but when 3 o'clock or 3:30 comes, I'm being called to identify my child.
Young people marched out of the high school where Cortland was killed, Huffman High School, and they said that 18 minutes should be recognized for the 17 at Parkland and for the death of Cortland as well. Will you be participating in the March for Our Lives in Washington or in Birmingham, in any of the protests across the country on March 24th?
Cortland's funeral is on March 24th, so we will be laying her to rest on March 24th. We will not be able to participate in any of those activities. My dad did go to the walkout on yesterday. My children participated in the walkout on yesterday. I did not go. I could not bear it to go. So my dad went as to represent our family.
Well, Shanice Abercrombie, our condolences to you and to your family. Shanice Abercrombie's niece, Cortland, was shot dead at Huffman High School in Birmingham, Alabama. Cortland Arrington was 17 years old. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. As we turn back to New York right now to talk about a massive protest that's planned for today.
Dozens of farm workers with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers have entered their last day of a 5-day fast outside the Manhattan office of Nelson Peltz, the board chair and largest shareholder of the restaurant chain Wendy's. They're demanding Wendy's sign on to the Fair Food Program, which would require the fast food giant to purchase tomatoes from growers that follow a worker-designed code of conduct that includes a zero-tolerance policy for sexual harassment and abuse in the fields. Wendy's is the only major fast food chain that has refused to sign on to the Fair Food Program. McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Chipotle, and Taco Bell have already signed on following protests by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. Nelly Rodriguez is one of the farm workers taking part in the 5-day fast.
It does not discourage us. On the contrary, Wendy's refusal thus far to join the Fair Food Program gives us the strength to be here as women, as mothers with families, as young people, the entire community of Immokalee who is here to fight for respect in the fields where Wendy's buys its tomatoes, and to show through our fast that we have a powerful commitment to this struggle. We've left behind our homes to show Wendy's that what this means to us, to show them that we're committed to creating change for all women.
Wendy's competitors, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Chipotle, and Taco Bell, all have joined the Fair Food Program, which the Coalition of Immokalee Workers say has virtually ended sexual harassment and assault for tens of thousands of workers on participating farms in 7 states. The Fast Food Today will end up in Time's Up Wednesday's march in New York. The Fast Today is going to end today. For more, we're joined by Gerardo Reyes Chavez, a farm worker and organizer with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, usually in Florida, but right now here in New York. You're wrapping up your fast today with a major march here in New York on Wendy's?
Yeah. Today is the last day of the 5 days that 81 people fasting in front of the headquarters of 3M Partners, which is where Nelson Peltz, one of the main investors and the president of the board of Wendy's, and the person who's really holding the keys for Wendy's to come to dialogue and reach an agreement with us is located. There's several people that are fasting with us in solidarity in different parts of the country. And we have been asking Wendy's to join the Fair Food Program to make all the rights that we have expand to other areas, but overall to bring Wendy's to the table so that they don't just go and exploit people in Mexico, which is what they did when we as workers were able to land all of these changes for the lives of tens of thousands of workers, eliminating sexual harassment and all of that. They basically punished their own growers, the people that they were doing business for years, for doing that. And they went to buy from Mexico, Bioparques de Occidente, a mega farm that had 270 workers in modern-day slavery in 2013. Then they moved to buy there 2 years later.
Well, what do you mean by modern-day slavery? What conditions do these workers have on the farms in Mexico?
Well, workers live in conditions where they didn't have the housing, for example, had no floors, no beds, no stoves, no bathrooms in some cases. And workers had to be freed by the intervention of the government in Mexico. So when you imagine all of these things, children working in the fields, women being promised 100 pesos per day, and end up receiving from 50 to 60, and not all of them, you can see that the conditions were really, really desperate for workers, and that's what Wendy's went to support, and that's without even mentioning one of the situations that happens a lot, which is sexual harassment in the fields for farm worker women.
Democracy Now! Reached out to Wendy's for their response to the Coalition of Immokalee Workers' demands. Wendy's spokesperson replied with a lengthy statement which read in part, "The Coalition of Immokalee Workers is spreading false and misleading information about the Wendy's brand and our business practices and their continuing effort to extract a financial commitment from us. We will not join their program and pay fees directly to them. We will certainly not compromise our commitment to our customers to deliver only the highest quality, ethically sourced products from Wendy's every day. All of our suppliers are bound to a strict code of conduct that requires ethical practices, and certain fresh produce suppliers, including all tomato suppliers, undergo third-party certified human rights assessments." Gerardo, can you respond to what Wendy's said? We're sorry they wouldn't come here in person or speak on the phone.
I mean, I would like to invite them to have an open discussion and debate if they were ready to prove that what they are saying is true. What we know is that we created, the Fair Food Program, and we have, as part of the Fair Food Program, there's a third-party organization, which is the Fair Food Standards Council, led by a judge from New York, working on the bench for 20 years. And they are the organization in charge of monitoring the pass-through of the penny per pound from the buyers to the farm workers directly. We could send you any stuff to show you how the bonus is marked. And we have all the data to show how the program works from bottom to top. What Wendy's is doing, basically, and that's without mentioning that there's 14 corporations that are doing this, that are working with us. What Wendy's is doing, it's basically going from misleading statements to basically accusations without base. And what we are saying is we invite them to join the Fair Food Program. We are not, we have all the information that's needed to prove that the lives of the workers are changing. They can come anytime to see how it works in the farms. And it's time for them to come to the table. They are, the way I see it, is that they are kind of like a boxer. You know, we have been trying to bring them to the table for a while. And they have never gone too far as to basically just lie like this and insinuate that somehow we're asking them to pay something that's not going to the workers, because that's something that they have been doing. What we're saying is it's time for them to come to the table, and they are kind of swinging. They are feeling the pressure. So we know that they are going to join the program. But
where is your march today?
The march today, we are going to be marching from the Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, which is on 2nd Avenue.
Near the United
East
Nations.
47. Yeah. And we hope to have thousands of people. We're inviting people from New York to join us. And we know that Wendy's is desperate, and those are the actions of a desperate corporation, which is good for us, you know. Children, women have come from Immokalee, living, work, standing on the cold, and all for the purpose of having dialogue with them.
Well, Gerardo, before we end, I just wanted you to say, you said 14 corporations are working with you, and they're these massive fast food chains, McDonald's, Burger King. Did you face initially the same kind of resistance from them as you're now facing from Wendy's? And what finally persuaded them?
Well, what persuaded them is the power of people. You know, all the corporations since the beginning, they recognize, not publicly, obviously, but they feel the pressure. When we take to the streets, they realize that they are not going to be able to get away with all the abusive conditions and the dismissal towards workers in their supply chain, and they end up signing. We hope that Wendy's takes this opportunity to, instead of paying a firm or whoever they are paying to write lies about how the program works, this collaboration would be, to join the program and make sure that they use their leadership as the only one of the 5 major fast food corporations to do what's right, to participate and help make all of this stronger and expand it so that more workers are protected.
You'll break your fast at the protest?
We will, yeah, we will.
Gerardo Reyes Chavez, farm worker, organizer with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, began farm working at the age of 11. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Rebecca Solnit joins us. Stay with us.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient song for bread.
Bread and Roses by Bobby McGee. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We spend the rest of the hour with one of the nation's most celebrated writers, Rebecca Solnit. This month marks the 10th anniversary of her groundbreaking essay, Men Explain Things to Me. In 2008, Solnit wrote, quote, "Men explain things to me and other women whether or not they know what they're talking about. Every woman knows what I'm talking about. It's the presumption that makes it hard at times for any woman in any field, that keeps women from speaking up and from being heard when they dare, that crushes young women into silence by indicating, the way harassment on the street does, that this is not their world. It trains us in self-doubt and self-limitation, just as it exercises men's unsupported overconfidence." Solnit wrote those words a decade ago, long before the Me Too and Time's Up movements swept across the country.
The essay has also been credited with launching the term mansplaining, though Rebecca Solnit did not coin that phrase. For more, we're joined now by Rebecca Solnit, writer, historian, activist, author of 20 books, including Hope in the Dark, and most recently, The Mother of All Questions. Rebecca Solnit is a contributing editor at Harper's, where she's the first woman to regularly write the Easy Chair column. Rebecca, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. So the effect of this essay that you wrote, 10 years ago, Men Explain Things to Me, and the effect that's had, and your focus on writing, as it always has been, on movements, how this feeds into your understanding of the power of movements.
I've always thought of feminism as a subset of a human rights movement about sort of inclusion and equality. And so, so this essay was about a way women are severely impacted by being treated as not credible, as not people who have something to say, as people whose voices shouldn't count, whether they're saying this is what's going on, you know, in the office, or no, I don't want to have sex with you, or he's trying to kill me. It's funny because I started writing with the famous opening anecdote about a man explaining my book to me, writing what I thought was going to be a very lightweight or a very funny piece, and it got pretty quickly into rape and murder. Credibility is a basic survival issue.
Well, in a recent Harper's piece, you write something that's very striking, saying it's an old truism that knowledge is power. The inverse, that power is often ignorance, is rarely discussed. You go on to say there's a large category of acts hidden from people with standing. The more you are, the less you know. So could you explain what you meant by that and how that applies specifically to what you just said, the impunity with which men are able to act and the ways in which women have been silenced?
Yeah, and I wrote that column thinking about everybody, servants, children, subordinates, employees, people of color who are treated as people who aren't important, who aren't witnesses, whose voices don't count, who often have people do things that they assume are off the record because these people will not be heard. And of course, my own experience with that is as a woman where it's like, oh, nobody will believe her that I did this. I can just talk over her and say it didn't happen. So, so again, I'm trying to think about the broader spectrum of how inequality of power.
Well, could you talk about that, your own experience with sexual harassment as you describe it in the Harper's piece?
Well, I've had thousands of incidents on the street when I was a young woman, but I wrote about something that happened to me when I was 18 and a restaurant worker. And I know, like farm workers, restaurant workers have a really high incidence of sexual harassment, and I wasn't an exception. There was this kind of scary old chef, bleary alcoholic with bloodshot eyes. He used to grab me when I was trying to wash the dishes in a cafe. And at that time, this was before Anita Hill changed the playing field a little bit, before some of the transformations we've had in the last few decades. I didn't believe, and I think I was accurate, that anybody was going to care, that my boss was going to care that this guy was grabbing me. And so what I actually did was made sure that, one of the, weeks or months into this happening, that when he grabbed me, I was holding a big tray of glasses right out of the dishwasher, and I screamed and dropped them. And the noise I made didn't really matter. I didn't really have a voice at that point, but the glasses had a voice. The sound of, 40 shattering glasses brought the owner running, and I just said he grabbed me, and you know, and the owner told off the chef, not so much because I should have the right to have jurisdiction over my own body, but because losing a whole tray full of glasses was expensive. And the cook was really annoyed because he knew that I'd essentially tricked him. But it was, you know, it was how I tried to have a voice when I was voiceless.
Rebecca, speaking of voicelessness, you know, the latest scandal of the White House involves the allegation that President Trump was involved with an adult film star, Stormy Daniels. The issue isn't so much that, is that he's trying to silence her. That's the allegation. And, you know, that she would have to pay $1 million if she speaks about this. What is your take on this? Everything from that to overall the Me Too and Time's Up movement about sexual harassment and rape.
Well, one of the things that should be said, and probably a lot of people know, is that non-disclosure agreements are a really common part of corporate settlements, but also kind of sexual violence settlements. They're sometimes imposed on college students by the university. They're often enforced in civil lawsuits. For example, the woman who charged Dominique Strauss-Kahn with rape received a settlement. She has a wonderful restaurant in the Bronx that she started, I've eaten at. She started out with the result.
And that's amazing, a hotel worker who challenged
Yes.
one of the most powerful men, former head of the IMF, is that right, who would, well, could have become the president of France.
That was an amazing case that she was able to be heard. And she was, of course, attacked. She also successfully sued a mainstream media outlet that claimed she was a prostitute. And, you know, and people attempted to silence her by discrediting her, calling her a prostitute, saying, why should we listen to her? And, but a number of other women came forward because of her courage and also talked about sexual violence in Dominique Strauss-Kahn and ended his career and destroyed his reputation, which deserved to be destroyed. But she did sign a non-disclosure agreement. What Stormy Daniels signed is a really typical thing that's one of myriad techniques for silencing women. And something that I think maybe shouldn't exist. It's not a victory if part of what you have to settle for is being silent. It perpetrates the problem, which is that when you said no, when you said this is not what should happen, you were silenced.
Well, Rebecca, as you said, your own experience, and as the Me Too movement shows, I mean, the experience of sexual harassment, of silencing, and even rape is very, very widespread. What do you think accounts for the fact that this movement took off in the way that it did with the revelations around Harvey Weinstein?
You know, I think that this movement was a long time in coming, and I think it's like the gun movement we're seeing now, that there is one specific thing, the shooting in Parkland, the revelations. Journalists uncovered about Harvey Weinstein's decades of horrific assaults and attacks on women, but the ground had been prepared. With the gun movement, we had used up all the excuses and justifications and evasions, all the thoughts and prayers. With the women's movement also, I think one factor was that women are really fed up, and we've seen that the last 5 years, because this movement goes back way beyond Me Too. It goes to campus rape activism in 2012 and a lot of other stuff that's happened in the last 5 years. And I think it also happened because some of the slow, boring, you know, work of feminism that doesn't get noticed, creating women who are in charge of what the news is, women who are judges, women who are producers, women who have positions of power, helped change who gets heard and what stories matter and whose rights matter. I think that we'd had stories like this before that didn't resonate, didn't lead to a lot of other men being fired, didn't lead to recognition that this is a systemic problem.
So were you surprised?
I'm always surprised that this is the time, because like, who knew that the Parkland shooting would be different than every other school shooting, and that we'd focus on their survivors and their beautiful voices rather than the dead and the killer. You know, so I was and I wasn't. And, you know, these things happen like earthquakes, long building of tension, kind of laying of groundwork, and then a sudden rupture.
We're going to have to break, but we're going to go to part 2, and we're going to post online at democracynow.org. Our conversation with Rebecca Solnit, writer, historian, activist. She'll be speaking at Cooper Union tonight on this 10th anniversary of Men Explain Things to Me. That does it for our broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks for joining us.